We will move on straight to the next panel, which is on knowledge creation and diffusion. And we selected this area not because it is highly critical, as we have heard from both Adam and Dirk, but also because it's an area which can be heavily influenced by policy. In other words, we can do something about productivity improvements through better knowledge diffusion. So we've heard from Dirk that the diffusion machine seems to be broken. There is something wrong happening. However, we can look at how research and value creation rhyme together already in the different European settings, and how we can scale up these solutions and bring them to a different level. So I'd like to welcome on stage now Chiara Criscuolo, who is head of productivity and business dynamics division at the OECD. She also manages the Global Forum on Productivity. Boeck, the executive vice president and chief strategy officer at IMEC in Leuven, as well as part-time professor of engineering at KU Leuven. Pia Sandvik, who is Chief Executive Officer of the Research Institutes of Sweden, as well as Vice Chairwoman of the Board of KTH Royal Institute of Technology. And my colleague and friend, Arjona Gracia, Chief Economist at the Directorate-General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission. Roman was previously Secretary-General for Science, Technology and Innovation in Spain. I would like to start with you so that we go straight to one of our crown jewels in Europe, which is IMEC. IMEC is a research and technology organizations, and when I think about solutions to knowledge diffusion, knowledge transfer, I often think that the easiest would be to clone IMEC. Obviously, that's not on the cards because these solutions need to emerge organically from their natural setting. But what can we do to use your experience more broadly? You can speak from here, you can speak from there as you wish.
Or maybe, thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. Being introduced as a jewel in the crown, I think it was, is a bit scary for the audience here. Typically, I don't speak at policy conferences, but I thought the introductions that we had today were really spot on. So I need to change my introduction a bit and use words that have been used by our two previous speakers. Technology and digital technology is what IMEC stands for. I brought a movie as a sort of a digital wallpaper. So if you can get that movie started, that will... I will speak over it, but it sets the scene. And digital technology has been mentioned as one of the broad technologies. It's an expensive lottery ticket, to quote Adam Poe. It's a really expensive lottery ticket, but it's a very global technology. It spurs global innovation. It rises the level of all boats, we believe, and we've seen it. Many technologies are related to this. We've heard cloud computing, we heard big data, artificial intelligence, which revived a couple of winters already, and it's back there now. And what you see here in the back is a technology, well, the need you have to invest in technology development, which is, the image is coming from Fraunhofer Institute, from Leti, Grenoble in France, and from IMEC here in Belgium. And the message behind this is that we all have been investing quite a bit in this type of technology, trying to bring it to the industry, but we realize that for building a strong European case, that connecting those innovations, that type of investment that you see here, which is very close to industry uptake, we need to bring that together to make sure that diffusion is going to happen. And we believe that in the next generation of technology, including artificial intelligence and cloud computing and even quantum computing, and all of these new terms where indeed there is no lack of new technologies coming, we need to make sure that there's a place here in Europe where we can find all that technology come to maturity. The second part of this movie, you've seen Into the Clean Room, and indeed you may have noticed it's quite expensive. If we bring this together, we do have a very important stake in Europe, which is recognized globally, even across the Atlantic or Pacific. bringing it together and having this technology ready doesn't mean innovation is going to happen. And has been made, rightfully so, quite a few strong points, is that we need to understand where this technology will land. What is the need of the user in this case, and what are the different applications that are going to be benefiting from it or being schumpetered, right, being totally disrupted. And how you get to that certain level of understanding in the industry is quite difficult. So therefore, all of us, including many of you who are working in research technology organizations, as of course I recognize we're not alone in this. It's really a joint ecosystem. We need to bring this knowledge of what the end user or the economy or even the society will need in the end. We need to bring that together to the technology challenges. And that vertical integration of the knowledge chain is extremely important. And it's an invitation to all, including the industry, but also society, to think with us. If we introduce artificial intelligence, the first thing you need to do is understand what the impact will be on society and how it will help some things forward, but how in other regions of our economy, of our daily life, it may hinder innovation or moving forward. So I think we can create the future by making alliances like this, making sure that the ecosystem understands it. And then having said that, and I totally agree with the opening statements earlier, that technology, although intellectually challenging as what we do, is not necessarily the problem. The problem, or is not the hardest thing to do, to put it right. Actually, you need to diffuse it in. So we all, in our operations, have a very strong emphasis on making sure that we understand the innovation, that we understand how that diffusion into new models of doing business, into new productivity paradigms, also in, of course, new products per se, but the whole aspect of how this innovates the products and the services in our daily life is going to be important. So that part is embedded in our working. We do go all the way with our partners to make that innovation land. And then thirdly, and I think that's also very important, all of us do focus a lot on venturing, because we do believe that making that structural change, that structural dynamics, and you see the downward curves, I think we need to really change that. So we're investing quite a bit. There's a lot of funds in Europe. I mean, money isn't necessarily the problem for getting started, but to scale, we do need indeed to focus on issues there and make sure that diffusion, that structural change that can happen, starting from technology maybe, it's a bit inward focused the way we are, but then making sure that we connect it to all of these challenges. And that would be my opening statements. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jo. You drew my attention right at the beginning when you said that you normally don't speak at policy conferences, which is true. I mean, you have kindly invited us to your events, and we were pretty much the only ones from a public institution at a technology conference, and we normally talk in our own circle, which I would say is probably part of the issue, right? And that's why in this conference today we are trying to break through that difficulty and have both worlds, because we need both. Now, Pia, you will take us through the role of test beds, testing facilities, and innovation hubs. Thank you so much. Again, you can speak from there or from here as you wish. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much for the invitation and the possibility to talk about these really important issues for the future of Europe. RISE is the fourth largest RTO in Europe, and we are different from IMEC because we are working in all technologies. We're a polytechnic RTO. I will talk about test beds, but I will actually start a little bit broader than that. I think I have some slides as well. Can I get them up? Because, of course, test beds is one important backbone in innovation system, or an important piece, but I think there are some other things that I can see from a perspective what's happening in Sweden, and I think it's happening in parts of Europe, but it should sort of be accelerating. First of all, next picture, please. I would say that the classical model of R&D is really being challenged by more iterative processes. sometimes you call it experiment and scale. We have to move faster. You have, in order to shorten time to market, you have to be able to sort really fast test if your process or product or whatever it is really working, but also do that in a context of where it's going to be implemented. So you really need to verify these innovations quite faster. Another important issue is that you can't work in silos anymore. It's in the interfaces between different technologies, between different branches, different sectors, that much of the innovation is actually going to happen and happens today. And as a CTO of a company today, you have to grasp many different technologies if you're going to be successful. And also, society has to take part of that as well in order to sort of make things happen. But we can also see a really huge trend with large companies coming together with small companies, startups, creating environments where they come together. And it's not necessarily always startups that are in the same field as these large OMOs. It could be in different areas, because you never know where the innovations is really going to happen. We can develop fantastic technologies, but still it won't be necessary that they will be implemented, because policies is not sort of being developed in the same time. And I think one issue that it's really obvious that we can have autonomous cars, but you can't be sure that you really can drive them on the streets actually, because the policies is not sort of working together. I also think that the governments have a really important role in this. So I think we are talking about collaboration in a totally new level. I think governments, and in EU as well, we need to together with industry and society, put up strategic agendas of what we really want to do in different areas and branches. Because otherwise I don't think we'll get the potential or the diffusion that we want to have. But of course, this is really important because we are facing so many huge societal challenges that we have to solve in a totally different way, I would say. So next picture, please.
I think there is,
I just looked at my iPad. Okay. What is a test bed then? On this slide, you see a photo from inside Avatar. It's one of our most recent test beds, and it's really an important piece of puzzle when it comes to development of connected, clean, and autonomous vehicles. And as you probably know, all of you, the automotive industry is sort of in the eye of the storm. And there will probably, the vehicles that will be on the roads within a few years, they are more like an ICT piece than a car. And within Avatar, you can test the vehicle's electronics to ensure that they are not disrupted by the surrounding environment, nor do they interfere with other technologies. The more the complex the vehicle becomes, the more important it's really to conduct interference tests on radar, cameras, sensors, with which they are really equipped then. With the Avatar Lab, we are offering a shield, repeatable, controllable test environment. And of course, we have highly skilled researchers that are working in this test bed to help industry to set up and do their designs. This could never have happened if it hadn't been done together with automotive industry. We have shared risk in the investment. They have guaranteed that they will use the lab. And we have set up the whole lab regarding to their needs. And it's an open test bed. Every company can come there to you. And you can say, if you make it simple, it's like to go to the hairdresser. You book time and then you go to Avatar and to do your tests. So it's also open for, even though the investments was taken by the larger automotive companies, small companies can come there as well. So it's really an arena for innovation. I think that these test beds are an important tool to diffuse knowledge and propel European growth and productivity and innovation. And this arena for collaboration that they can really be is so important. I also see something else coming up that we haven't really been taken care of in Europe for the moment, and that's regarding scale-up from startups, because regarding large companies, we talk about industrialization. You sort of have quite mature products or processes, even though you're facing disruptive technology changes. But when you talk about scale-up from startups, it's something totally different. You have to be much more agile in these environments. They should come and test technologies that they have and do it in 1 week, go back, come back again. You have to put up new facilities. We can see this coming up in Shenzhen together with Silicon Valley, where they work together with business models as well. It's interesting to realize that Europe has a strategy regarding research infrastructure, ESFRI. They have specific funding for what they want to do, but we don't have it for test beds or technology infrastructure within Europe. And I would say that it's so much needed because we need it for better resources, for competencies. We need it in order to avoid unnecessary overlaps, because otherwise each country will sort of build up their own test beds, and we can't really get the whole potential of what we're doing in our different countries within Europe or EU. But it's also important to take the knowledge that is developed in some of these infrastructures and to share it with others. And of course, to share the results to SMEs as well, and really be this type of arena where they can join and come together to develop knowledge. But it's also about regions that don't have these technology infrastructures at all. They need to have access to this. I would say that there's a really huge interest regarding this testbed strategy among member states and industry. And I know that the high-level industrial roundtable on strategic value chains has really pointed out that we need these type of arenas to work together, and that it's really a critical moment right now for EU to do something in this area. And of course, to support scale-up, industry scale-up and technology diffusion across the whole of Europe. We are facing so many societal changes, and social unrest is one of them. We have to have many citizens who find it difficult to see a future and find their own place in the future Europe. And these test beds is, of course, it's only one solution, but we do also do them in real life, where we can test them in cities, how we should build them. So it's also about including the citizens of Europe as well in another way than we do today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pia. When you were speaking about test beds and prototyping, what came to my mind is a discussion I was at over the weekend in Helsinki, Shenzhen versus Silicon Valley. And there were European executives who were in an Oxford-style debate sitting on both sides. And what emerged is that in Shenzhen you can prototype things, you can test things much more quickly than in the Silicon Valley. So in the Silicon Valley it would take you weeks probably, if not months. In Shenzhen you can apparently take a taxi and go to the factory and start prototyping on the go. So that makes a difference in the world where speed and agility matters. The funding models are different as well in capital markets in the US, and more the big companies like Huawei, Alibaba, Tencent. We are in Europe probably somewhere in between, namely, yes, we have a rising share of VC, that's for sure, but it's nowhere near where we want to be and where the US is. We have some mentor firms, let's put it that way. I think in Sweden, Volvo is an example of a company where a lot of startups are collaborating with it. So that's an ecosystem issue as well. Would love to discuss that later on. But let's hear from Chiara first about what you have to say about intangible investments and the dispersion of innovation. Please, Chiara.
Okay, so I'm going to start by probably changing what I wanted to say and try to connect what was said during this panel by the previous speakers and what was said this morning by Dirk and Adam. Let me quote Ms. Sandvik. She said, of course we have highly skilled researchers. So, yes, it's about technology, yes, it's about the test bed, but I think one important point that you make is that you really need to have the skilled needed for this. And let me also take what Dirk said. It's not only about technology. Technology is the easy part, that's what he said. And, I think when Dirk mentioned why we see a slowdown, one of the focuses was on the transition cost of adoption and this diffusion of digital technology, which are very much general purpose technology. One point that I think is important is this idea that when you have a general purpose technology, what really matters is the complementary assets that firms have, and as Dirk said, to make them work in their own processes. And in order to do this, you have to have what we call intangible assets. And if we think of measurement problems in productivity, think of it to the power of n when you think about measuring intangible assets, not only for us as economists and policymakers, but also in terms of valuation from investors. And what we find is that exactly intangibles don't seem to operate in an homogeneous way, and they seem to operate in a very asymmetric way. And they seem to advantage firms that are very productive, firms that are very profitable, firms that are very large. And if we look here, like complementing what Dirk presented, when we look at the best versus the rest, and the rest that we have called up to now laggards, these are the 95% of the population. So there is a lot of heterogeneity when you think about 95% of businesses. Most of them are SMEs. Some of them are more productive than others. And what I wanted to show here, and let me perhaps just stress the left-hand side, is that if you look at the productivity gap, think of it as a measure of inequality across firms, okay? Like the top 90%, these are the frontier firms, and the very bottom 10%, you see that there is a sort of strong correlation between the intensity of intangible assets used in particular sector and this gap between the top firm and the bottom firms. Now, what is also interesting is that, as I said, who benefits most from these intangible assets are really the very top firms. So something is happening that doesn't let the bottom firm benefit from intangible assets and also from digital technology. Now, do we think that this is something to stay or not? I mean, we were discussing before whether we need to be positive or a bit more pessimist. I think this is something that is going to stay because this gap, or this particular important role of intangible for this productivity gap is very strong in a service economy. And nowadays, when you think about manufacturing, this is about 15% of GDP of the economies. The services is really where we are moving with. We are becoming more and more service providing for economies rather than, manufacturing gadget economies. Now, let me perhaps keep this one. Now, one important, as I said, there are issues about measuring intangibles. I'm standing here in the sort of on the shoulders of giants. I mean, there has been a lot of work done by colleagues, Jonathan Haskell, Carol Corrado, and Cecilia Iosa-Lasignan, who have really spent a lot of time measuring intangibles. And if we use their work, and this is joint work with them, what we find is that what really seems to matter is the role of economic competencies. So again, the role of skills, and that's why I was trying to connect with the previous speaker here. It's particularly important, economic competencies and also innovative property. Now, when we think about the dispersion of productivity, as I said, we always think about the best versus the rest. But there is a big part of the economy, sort of these laggards firm, which represent, either the bottom 10% or even, let's be more broader in our definition, and let's think of 40% of firms. These are normally the firms that we don't want to focus on because we think these are the laggards and we just get rid of them. Now, yes, one part of these laggards are firms that perhaps are defined zombies generally. But because of our measurement challenges, some of these firms are actually very high potential startups. These are firms that are probably, still have to learn. They cannot charge the same high prices as incumbents because they still have to build their brand, their reputation, but they have very high potential. They could be the next Google, Facebook, etc. Of Europe, if you want. Now, one important point as well is that, and this is what I show you on this slide, is that they are very, as I said, not very small in terms of gross output, value added, and employment. They don't weigh as much, but they still represent about a quarter of employment in the whole population. And as Adam Posen said, productivity shouldn't be a mean for itself, it should be a mean for an end. And the end here is really try to be more inclusive, make productivity, digital technology, intangible assets work for everyone. So these are firms that if we improve their productivity, they will increase their wages, and so the benefits of productivity will spread broader to the workers. I'm actually running out of time. Now, one important point I wanted to make is that these firms that are, as I said, on average smaller and younger, actually, they do catch up, but their catch-up rate, sort of this diffusion that we were talking about before, has been going down consistently over the 2000s. So, and as Dirk said, there are two processes, diffusion and reallocation. Diffusion is really slowing down, as I'm showing you here. Now, this is particularly serious when we look at digital technology. The only technology that seems to work to facilitate and speed up catch-up is actually ICT intermediates. And here what you see is the role of cloud, as Dirk mentioned before. Now, what can policy do? Here is where reallocation comes into place, and in particular, allocation of skills. There is a big problem of skill mismatch in Europe. And if there is skill mismatch, this is when these laggard firms do not manage to benefit from digital technology and cannot really implement them. And that's where, matching of skills is particularly important, and, trying to decrease the number of underqualified workers in the workforce. And institutional training, as I'm trying to show you in the slides, we see has a positive effect on increasing this catch-up process by startup and laggards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Chiara. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we've had now three different perspectives from both two people very hands-on involved in the knowledge transfer domain, and also from Chiara, who looks more broadly at the phenomena. We'll hear at the end from Roman what we need to learn about all this and include in our policy discussions. I would welcome any questions that you might have at this stage. Just please raise your hands. But perhaps to Jo, I would like to ask you to expand a little bit on this idea of vertical integration of knowledge chains. I mean, how do you work it out in practice?
I think traditionally we focused on well, if you recall the images, chip technology, just to give that one example, where you have a full ecosystem of suppliers of materials, tools, companies that make the integrated circuits, and then the ones that actually build it into applications. That has, over the past 30 years, the first 20 of those, been very standard, quote unquote. Now, a lot has changed in that industry, and that for sure is also true in other industries. But this example particularly, because the global dynamics is one, but also the need to understand that technology and the impact to the systems has increased. So we see that also the companies that look at mobility, that look at life science and healthcare applications, that look at, in general, energy, all of these domains, which are also showed in the movie, needed to understand where this technology goes. And I think in that sense, and I would like to strengthen the point that was made by Ms. Sandvik, where the test beds are essential, and where that the full supply chain, the full ecosystem can actually benefit from the understanding where technology goes, where the application go, and where in the end the users will benefit. And I think that's very important. We see it happening in our research as well, that we have companies on board that we traditionally would not find close to chip technology or digital technology in general, that are now very eager to understand where this innovation goes in order to I guess, help themselves in that diffusion process and build the word that has been fortunately mentioned a few times as very critical, to help build the skills that are needed to absorb that. Because if anything is hampering diffusion, just to again iterate the point that was made by Dr. Pilot, I think before, skills and the necessary workforce to do that is going to be critical.
Thank you so much. To Pia, I would have a question relating to the role of the policy framework in making experimentation and test beds in this particular case easier and applicable at scale. I mean, do you see a role for public policy in stimulating that type of approach, or is it more driven by the businesses themselves?
I think it has to be done in collaboration, actually, because these, at least the huge ones, are really necessary to do the funding and the investments in them. But I would rather talk also about if you have the technology and but you can't implement it because the policies are not in place. So it really has to be a joint teamwork, I would say. And we can also see, because we have really our history is very technology driven. All our researchers has been in the technology area, but now we are recruiting people we are recruiting social scientists, we are recruiting lawyers, and we are more moving also to have people that can look at things from a system view, because we see that and then transition management as well, because these processes need to be coming together, because otherwise you can't get the diffusion you want, not inside your company, and you can't get it inside in the society either. So it's really about getting different type of actors coming together. So that's why we need this type of competence within RISE as well, because otherwise it won't happen. So I think the role of diffusion of technology and innovation is really changing quite fast, and we have to be agile there, because otherwise the other ones that are running fast, they will be so much ahead of us.
Can I strengthen the point on that test bed? And we often call it also living labs. I think it's very important. So for instance, smart city, there's many smart cities out there that actually didn't work really for the citizen. So in a sense, for instance, also here in the local region, we have the city of Antwerp, where we're rolling out such a living lab very close to the citizen. And of course, it's supported or needs to be supported by the local authorities, by the larger companies that can roll out technology that's already there to build best practices. But the point I want to make is that if you have the citizen involved, it will also help guide policy making. Because of course, the citizens and the politics is very close. And so if you find a way to enthuse the public on new technology, then that's going to work. The other side is also true. If you find a way to alienate or distanciate, if that's a word, to build a distance between the users and the technology, it is never going to fly, because policy will not take it up. And I think we have an important role to play. It's often technology push, but it will be connected more so in the future through these test beds and living labs with the citizen and the end user.
I can just a short comment on that. We also are setting up like policy labs where you can stress the business model you have or the technology. What will happen if we want to diffuse this and put it to market? So then we sort of have a process for going through all the steps and see will there be a stop somewhere? What can be done in order to avoid that or to mitigate that? And there's also actually been a committee that has been appointed now in Sweden in order to look at these issues.
Yeah. A question to all three of you has to do with whether or not there is space for systemic solutions coming from also the public level, because a lot of the innovations are breakthrough innovations that change the way cities operate, the way citizens commute, in mobility. We will hear about autonomous driving in the next panel. But a lot of these innovations require systemic solutions. I mean, do you see the policy framework in place to make that easier? I don't know who would like to.
It's a very tough question, evidently. Well, from the technology side, it's hard to push that, but I think it's very important to see it happen. Maybe one element in that framework is the important projects of common European interest, which is a framework built to support the larger ecosystems, again that word, to support that, to make investments more easy and local and stronger, and to connect again that technology innovation to the end. So I think that's one example maybe of a structural support in a sense to accelerate the uptake and the diffusion. There must be more. Maybe my colleagues have thought of one.
I mean, I guess when one thinks of, I don't know if my thing is on. Perhaps, I mean, one issue is one of also, like infrastructure. I think that's an important one, because if you think about autonomous vehicle and smart city, if you don't have, for example, 5G, it's not going to work. So I think that's something that might be a systemic intervention there.
And I'm asking this question because we have a lot of firms coming to see us with genuine compassion in people's eyes. I mean, a lot of people from industry come and tell us it has never been so exciting as it is now. And we see that, but at the same time, it's not necessarily the case that the framework exists for these innovations to really grow to scale.
I think if the policy making doesn't, if it doesn't move faster, it will really be a problem, I would say. And I think we also have one other important issue. We were talking a little bit about AI. We mentioned that just broadly, and I think if we look at the cybersecurity side of AI and all the data that is being handled, will be even more handled in everywhere. I would say that we in Europe don't have any digital platforms that take care of data. It's really scary, I would say. We are so much in hands of everybody else with outside Europe. So, and I think that has to be a joint venture. It's not just about 5G. It's about really where you store your data. So that there, I think that's another type of policy making. But I really think that we have to come together from both industry, from researchers, and from policymakers to try to achieve this type of solutions.
So yeah, maybe indeed, I think the security of data is a very important point in general. Actually, the legislation in Europe also has been guiding globally also on that. There's also there's many changes that are coming, and the legislation there can definitely help, and we should impact on that. On the other side, maybe a different example on healthcare. Yeah? So their policy can help to stimulate new technology, new innovation to come in. If you look at many of our startups that are in healthcare today, they find the US market to be more adaptive to changes, because across states there's a more uniform policy on how to treat innovation in healthcare and how to make sure that it lands in a consumer or patient's hands. And so I think there is definitely improvement we can do across the nations in Europe to make a more level playing field and to stimulate this type of innovation. Just another example.
Yeah. Pia?
Yeah, I think regarding legislation, it sort of came to my mind regarding GDPR. I've been looking into the integrity questions regarding each citizen and how data can be misused or could be used in a good way. And I think it's really a tricky balance of getting legislation that promotes competitiveness, but at the same time really cares about the citizens as well. And I think that we have to watch out so that we don't go too far on the edge of looking at the integrity and forgetting about competitiveness. I think we probably will have to move regarding GDPR and sort of be an agile there as well. That's not the way you normally do legislation, but I think we are in a new world, so even legislation has to move faster. And I think we will see a GDPR 2, perhaps, that will sort of balance this a little bit more.
There was a report by the high-level group on artificial intelligence, both regulation and investment. And one of the messages there was that business-to-consumer platforms are perhaps already catered for by others in the world, the US and China in particular. But there is ample space left, and this is business-to-business platforms. especially, and this is more, e-government type of platforms where Europe, by definition, has a huge edge because of the role of the public sector in Europe. I mean, would that argument appeal to you, Jo and Pia? Is that how we should think about this in terms of not perhaps challenging those who are strong already, but more looking for the niche where we would rely on our own assets in Europe?
Well, I think we need to do both, of course, strengthen the strengths and make sure that we find good niches to move forward. I think that's the structural dynamics or the competitive dynamism, I think it was called earlier. I'm not sure, again, how to really phrase the best answer to this question, but I think we both on the venture side, making scale-ups possible, making sure that moves in fast is important. Don't forget the power of large companies also. They can really pull things. They can install test beds. They can enable it. They can make sure that the innovation moves fast as well. And many use the combination of these two, right? The companies that move fastest have a good acquisition and stimulation policy in terms of new ideas coming in from the outside or moving fast from the inside. So I think that I don't know how much policy can help there. Good management was coined earlier as very important, so maybe we have to train our management well to enable that. But then again, also we need a very high flexibility at the workforce level and at skills, so continuous learning, making sure that people are on edge. And as one comment I'd like to make there from a recent poll that we did in the industry locally here, even in the region of Flanders, we looked at companies that are in business where we see artificial intelligence move to change their business very, very fastly. And we asked them, are you aware of this? And many said no, and the other smaller part said yes. Now the companies that said yes, we asked them, do you have people inside or are you hiring people from the outside? They said yes, we have them inside, and yes, we hire from the outside. So they'll move faster. The companies that didn't see it coming, we asked them the same question. Do you have people inside? They said, obviously, no. The second part is, are you planning to hire people from the outside? Again, the answer was no. So we're seeing a digital divide coming in companies. And so it's often to do with the fact that they don't have people or access to the skills that they need. And I don't know even if that's an answer to your question, but I thought it was a point to make anyway.
Yeah, I was thinking about, I had a discussion a few days ago with AB Volvo. It's one of the largest companies in Sweden. They have their home market in Sweden is 2%, but they have 50% of their research there. So I think not forgetting about the prerequisites in order to create a good environment or an innovative environment regarding research, test beds and things like that, and competence, because that's why they're staying in Sweden. And because it's also easy to collaborate with other industries because there's so much of the technology now that is generic. It's been generically developed. But I also think that perhaps I was talking about the digital platforms and saying that we should move faster. We should really do something. I think it will be very difficult for us to be competitive regarding that. But I think regarding security, for security reasons, we really need to do that. And it's not just about the citizens' integrity and regarding defense. It's also about the possibility for industry to be able to keep their data. So even though we won't perhaps be the star on the competitive sky, we still need it for other reasons. So I think we sort of have to look at it as a system as well. Where do we have the strengths? Move there, make sure that we have the prerequisites that is needed, but also move for other assets like mitigating the risks actually. Because I think we are still part of a world where we really we value people's integrity, we value democracy and things like that. And those values we need to really, we have to keep up for them.
Thank you so much. I have a few questions on Slido. If there are any questions that you want to ask with the microphone, you are most welcome. So are EU state aid rules a barrier to more active diffusion policies? I'm looking at Chiara. Is intellectual property becoming a barrier to the diffusion process? And is market concentration in the digital sector contributing to the slowing catch-up rate of smaller and younger firms? Chiara, a lot to address there, but feel free to answer any of these, and perhaps Roman, in his final word, could also have a word about state aid rules and IPR.
I leave the state aid rule fund because it's
very
politically
good.
charged.
To the EU officials, you're absolutely entitled to that.
So let me perhaps start with the last one on market concentration, because we are doing some work on this. And I think, let me start with one point. There is good and bad concentration. And I think what has been mentioned before about superstar firms, about frontier firms, and the fact that they gain market share, especially in the digital sectors, might actually be what we want for a productivity growth point of view. In a way, this is good reallocation. Now, the problem arises when having these large players in the market act as a barrier to entry, and we see, and I think that's what the worrying part is that there has been a decline both in entry rate, and that's what Dirk showed in his slides, but also a decline in reallocation of resources. Sort of job reallocation has been declining, and that means slowing diffusion, because most of the knowledge spillovers happen through mobility of workers. So that to me is the two problems. Now, is this a reflection of bad regulation, of the bad work of antitrust authority? That's where I think I start saying, okay, let's be careful about making this very quick connection, because this seems to be happening, yes, in the US, but also in Europe, also in Japan. So it seems to be really driven much more by this structural change, and one of the things that we find is that this role of intangible assets, which might have been reinforced by the low interest rates that we have seen in the last few years. There are theories and also some evidence that shows that the fact that we have low interest rate has put these large incumbent firms in a much more advantageous position to make the most of the intangible economy and the digital technologies as well, while startups, because there isn't really a market for intangible. Even when you think of patent, which is the more collateralizable intangible assets that they have, we still don't have a secondary market for that. And that's where Europe could play a role as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. So we have one question in the third row.
Yes. My name is Martin Aarup. I'm from a think tank in Copenhagen called CPOS. You were mentioning the fall in the diffusion rate and thinking about education as being a reason for it. Well, we're spending as much on education now as we were, and maybe more actually, and we're actually spending quite a lot in Europe. And now we're moving into considering other things. Could it be labor markets? And I agree completely, labor markets are very different, and still we're seeing the diffusion rate going down in all kinds of places. So if we try to look for a common thing that has changed over time, but is the same everywhere, regulation seems to me to be a very likely explanation. Not of everything, of course, but in my opinion, regulation is an underrated burden on innovation and productivity. So Uber is a good example of that. It's obviously a very used example, but it's good because people understand it. We all know what it's like to take a taxi. We all know how Uber has innovated the sector, and we all see how regulation has stopped that innovation from actually taking place in many places in Europe. And it is likely, in my opinion, that that's the tip of a very, very large iceberg. So most companies will not do like Uber, which is a very controversial company, and just move in anyway. They would look at something and say, well, this is interesting, but it's illegal, so we won't do it. Or they'd look at it and think, well, this could be done. Maybe we should get some investment. The venture capitalists would say, well, very interesting, but is it legal? No, it's not, and then they won't get the money. So what is your take on this? I'm asking the whole panel.
Yeah.
Do you think the regulatory burden, and just one comment, since 1989, the regulatory burden in Denmark, measured as the number of words in the total legislation, has tripled. We're talking about a tripling since 1989.
Yes, so very relevant question in sort of the sequencing dimension. What comes first, breakthrough innovation and then regulation, or should regulation anticipate some of the future changes and innovations to come? Who would like to address this? Pia?
I'm not a lawyer, so. But anyway, I think that you can't really, if you should say that regulation should go ahead of innovation, it's impossible because you can never know where the innovation is going to happen. But I think it's more about having regulation that is agile. And from what I've seen in history anyway, you can't really stop innovation. The solutions will come up at least anyway. They will win that race, I would say. At least if it's solutions and new innovative ideas that's really needed, that people want to have. If you have them, you can't stop it. It will just find another way, I would say. So then it's more about having processes for taking care of that in order to be able to give more for welfare, whatever it is. So.
Just anecdotally on the example given on Uber, I think there are some companies that actually don't want it, and there's a lot of problems around that. There are countries actually where you see car companies or taxi companies embrace it and have all of the suppliers come in and of transport like Uber and the likes and embrace it in their own company. So then they'll be creative. If you look at all of the food delivery service, that's one other thing, right? So restaurants today, or actually restaurants 5 years ago had about 3% roughly of their takeout ordered through internet. Today, it's 30%, 30. And so if you're now Deliveroo and Uber Eats and name them all, you see the counter of a restaurant being populated by iPads and the sort for all of these different delivery companies. And so now there's a new business model coming on how do you integrate that new model in the existing model. And so there's a lot of creativity that doesn't need legislation and actually is going to be totally legal to integrate these new ways of working. But again, the larger firms and even the ones that are now digitally strong could also be very much surprised by new things coming, and they'll be waking up in a new world if they don't pay attention. So there's no complacency possible. You need to really move.
I was thinking about one concrete example regarding the thing I said. If we look at the music industry, we had Pirate Bay, and they all really wanted to forbid it. They did everything that they could do to make it happen in order to stop Pirate Bay. Then Spotify came. And Spotify made it possible for the industry of music to earn more money than they ever had. We pay more money for music as consumers than we've ever done before, because they came up with a solution that was acceptable and that made it possible. So I think that's probably not about legislation, but that's a way of really getting through with your innovation in order to get a solution implemented that's really wanted and needed.
Well, thank you very much. I would now, before Roman draws policy conclusions for us, I would now like to invite Artur Kupczunas, who is co-founder of Saule Technologies, a firm that produces perovskite thin film solar panels and is based in Poland, to tell us what diffusion of technology, how does diffusion of technology look like from his perspective, from the perspective of a firm. So we wanted to bridge that sort of gap between the policy-making world and the real worlds, and now we'll hear from the real worlds.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much. It's nice to be here. I was asked to make a 5-minute presentation about 5-year story of the high-tech startup, which sounds quite impossible, but we're doing impossible things in our company, so I said, why not? So in Saule Technologies, we're dealing with new kind of crystal that calls perovskite. You probably know silicon panels that are pretty heavy, rigid, and heavy. We're dealing with completely new material to produce flexible and very lightweight photovoltaic panels that are significantly more flexible than silicon. They are versatile, flexible. They have very high low light performance. They might be ultra thin. They are semi-transparent, and we can also tune the colors of this. Why it's so interesting? Because their efficiency is growing rapidly. So you can see these yellow dots here comparing to blue dots about silicon. So we can see the efficiency, so how much of the sunlight we can convert into electricity. Perovskite gains in 10 years development, something that silicon made in the last 50. Of course, it's very interesting from investment point of view. This is why we started with this project, because most of you probably know that PV market is growing very fast. And one sentence I like from The Economist: perovskites have the potential to outshine silicon in solar panels. Saule Technologies is close to bringing the first commercial perovskite solar cells to market. But how it started? In 2014, Olga Malinkiewicz, she's a PhD, she was awarded in Photonics 21. Together with my business partner, Piotr, we read about her and her achievement in a short newspaper article. So we bought a plane ticket, because then she was studying in Valencia in Spain. And we met her and we presented her like 3 parts of her career: university career, which is quite obvious, maybe high-tech corporation, and some of them called her, and maybe owning a own company, like the startup company. She called us after a month, and she chose the startup, so it was quite cool. We started a company, but we didn't know what to do, actually. We had like €250,000 for investment, so we invested in the first lab, which is not looking very promising. We started with a glove box like this. This is a IKEA-made glove box. So here we have the nitrogen, for example. Yeah, here we have a very professional glove box. But this allows us to make the first samples and to look for investors for this company. So, of course, we started from Poland, because we came from Poland. We started in Warsaw. No one understands us, what we want to do. Then we looked in other European countries. So we had one offer from London, but we were trying to look for another offer. So we went to US. We make silly things like going to Tim Cook home, directly to Apple, and we were trying to interest him in our panels to implement into the smartphones, to never charge the smartphones from the grid. And finally, we had opportunity to find investor in Japan. We signed a contract with Hideo Sawada-san. This is the investor in the middle. He gave us, he invested in the company like €4 million, and the rest we could gather from European Union money, like 6 million, and we gathered 10 million for this project. So we were able to build our first professional laboratory, and of course, to employ a proper team, which is the core value of the company. Today, it's 27 scientists from 13 different countries. They all live in Poland. And this is the core asset of the company. This is what they are working on. So very short movie. Because we are working on the inkjet printing solar cells. It wasn't obvious how to print a crystal, because we are talking about semiconductor. And you can see the real-time process of printing a crystal that's called perovskite. So you can see pretty rapid growth of the crystal. And this is the main part of this photovoltaic cell. And thanks to this development, we are able to produce these A4 size small panels. And that was our path from the mid-2014 to 2017 to have this MVP. This year, we are going to build a first production line that we already ordered, and we are working on it. So in the last quarter of this year, we'll be able to produce 1 square meter. So it's 1 meter per 1 meter. But what is the most important factor here is the diffusion of this technology into the companies, even if not ready. So in 2018, we signed the first JDAs, which stands for Joint Development Agreements, with a company like the Swedish Skanska, for example, that they are very interested in to implement our technology into their building facades. So because we didn't want to make a mistake, we didn't want to develop the technology that wouldn't fit to potential customers' needs. So this is why we're signing these contracts, and we have first implementation in, like, this is laboratory scale, but this is implementation in the real-life conditions in Skanska building in Warsaw. We have another JDA for the lightweight solar panels for the roofs of the factories of one of the European car manufacturers. I cannot say which is because it's under NDA. We are also working with the companies that are very interested in IoT implementation, because IoT market is growing even faster than the PV market. And of course, some kind of offsite project that we founded also investors that might be interested into implementing. This is a barrier foil with extra electrode that we can use in our applications, but also for other applications like the flexible LED panels, for example. And of course, we are doing this MVP, minimum viable product tests. This is the photovoltaic wall in Japan, in front of one of the buildings of our investors, and endless possibilities of implementation of this technology for other applications. For revenue generations, model in our company, sale of perovskite panels, sale of licenses for the applications, sale of production lines in a joint venture model for other continents than the European continent, and sale of additional products. And the JDA example for IoT application that we are doing, because this is a very interesting how to keep the revenue or the money stream for the company like this, because there is a huge gap, unfortunately. Some of you may know the expression like valley of death for the companies like this. In the first stage, we have this opportunity to have business angel and EU grants. But then, like, we have round B here, when you don't have enough revenue stream and you still need money to implement your laboratory investment into the real life. So I want to present you a 1.5 minutes movie with Olga. So if we can put the sound.
Having the fossil fuels running out, we have to think for the future. To power our planet, we have to find some alternative source of energy. I'm Olga Malinkiewicz, and I'm innovator in solar energy. It's the purest source of energy that is available to everyone. We have perovskite material that can convert the sun energy into electricity in a very efficient way. We've created a solar panel that are very lightweight, flexible, at a very low cost. What is the best about this technology is the solar cell is that you can print them. These printers that we are using, they are very similar to the printers that you all have in your houses. We can put these panels on the buildings. We can make it partially transparent. We can put it in the windows, put it on the back of our phones. Unlimited applications. One of the big advantages of this technology is that it works in the artificial light, and you can recycle the indoor lighting. We can revolutionize the use of the solar power with this technology. Our team is international, excellent scientists, engineers, chemists, physicists.
It's a very precisely constructed team with people from all around the world bringing their knowledge. It's magnificent to be a part of it.
Now Poland have the resources that can invest and develop new concepts. It's a good place to start a business at the moment because the costs are lower and the quality of the service is very high. There's no better time than now.
Poland, to me, was the big opportunity, jumping from the basic science in the laboratory to science that can actually make a difference.
Doing this project in Poland is important for me because I would like to show other people that they can achieve something in Poland. This project is going to change the world.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Fascinating journey. If I can ask you just one question, because you mentioned EU grant at some point, but this was after you've traveled to California, to Japan. So what's the issue? I mean, is it how difficult was it to eventually find us with our modest buckets of resources?
Yeah, so EU grants have its limitations. So we have our own contribution, like equity money. So even if we have this money, we can leverage the investors' money. So it's a very good mechanism to have it, but still it's for the fundamental scientific investigation. It's not for the further growth. It's very difficult to get money like in the Horizon 2020 perspective. And this is a very good instrument to leverage investors' money in the projects like this, for sure.
Thank you so much. We'll come back to the funding issue in the next panel with Iliana, who will tell us all about it, what we are doing in the EU to scale up funding. But now over to Roman. So this was a very I think good idea to outsource the conclusions and policy takeaways to someone who is best suited to do so. Roman, what does that? What does all that mean for the EU policy in a nutshell, of course?
Thank you, Paweł. I think it means a lot. It was really, let's say, fascinating to listen to everything that was said this morning, and for me it's a really difficult task to connect the dots. So I thought that instead of doing it in a traditional way, I would tell you a little bit of a story. And the story goes like this. Basically, once upon a time, there was a world and there was a continent in this world in which technologies and innovation used to diffuse across countries, across firms, across sectors, and the diffusion machine was working, as Gracia, the Secretary-General of the OECD, would say. Skills were produced by universities, and they were demanded by the labor market. And the market success was driven by knowledge of one technology, of one sector, of one business model, of one country. And these benefits from these innovations that were put into the market were actually more or less naturally equally distributed across the place, and productivity growth was more or less relentless. And science and technology were evolving, but they were taking kind of parallel paths. But then one day something happens here, and the world as we know it is over, as Ariam would say. There is new socioeconomic forces that are hitting. So we have aging of the population, we have climate change, we have shifting geopolitics, and we have, I think, a huge digital transformation of the economy, and a transformation that can change the retail sector as we have seen it over the past years. We have artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, machine learning algorithms, you name it, emerging, but we don't see this reflecting in the productivity statistics, as we have heard from our keynote speakers this morning. So people and politicians start to talk suddenly about the future of work and the kind of race against the machines, or with the machines. They start to talk about, let's say, climate emergency instead of climate mitigation. They start to talk about, places that matter and places that don't matter. And why is all of this kind of happening? And I think that what I can trace back to the discussions of this morning is that the DNA of innovation, as we know it, has changed enormously over the past. And it has changed because of two main reasons. And I think the first one is complexity, and we have seen amazing examples of how to work around complexity this morning. We have heard this from Joe at IMEC, where they are, kind of working at the cross-discipline of, in many different crossroads of sectors and disciplines. We see, for example, that a lot of innovations are now happening you can find organ on a chip. You can have something that is between biotech, medicine, nanotech. You can have autonomous vehicles between transportation and manufacturing. And also this is all becoming very much more science-driven, frontier science-driven, and we have seen this from the example of Artur, with the kind of nanomaterials, which, by the way, is something. There is a connection to the University of Valencia, which is my alma mater, so I'm very happy about this. That's also a really nice connection to the previous intervention. Then we have seen from Chiara that innovation is getting increasingly concentrated. That we see a lot of superstar kind of firm patterns appearing. We have leading firms and laggard firms, and there is a big package of laggard firms, big fat tail of the distribution, 95% are there. And who are these firms? How can we kind of drive the public policy to lift them out of there? So I think that this is also a very important thing that we have learned this morning. Pia has been talking about test beds and about not only test beds but also policy labs. I think it is quite important that we also, set ourselves, equip ourselves properly to be dealing with this kind of new, let's say, dynamics of innovation and the complexity and the concentration of this innovation. And what we see is that this complexity and this concentration has led, of course, to a lack of innovation diffusion, and this was a main point of this morning. And the question is, how can we, kind of make Europe profit from the huge benefits that this is bringing forward and facing the huge challenges that are appearing. And public policy, and I agree very much with Pia, needs to modernize in its delivery. We cannot have, as Madeleine Albright used to say, that politicians are faced with 21st century technology, they listen to 20th century technology, and they provide solutions for 19th century technology. And I think we need to kind of move away from this into a much more agile, forward-looking, kind of transformative, driven policy, which is much more participatory, and where there is a role for the policy mix to move out of silos as well in terms of policy making. Where I come from Research and Innovation Directorate-General, so I will of course tell you that science and innovation is crucial, for Europe's future, but it doesn't mean anything if you do it in isolation. And this is why, we are now with the Horizon Europe coming up with the research and innovation missions, which are actually corridors where the different policies can align, where we can have investments, where we can have as well a regulation, where we can have, of course, as well the necessary reforms through your European semester and other processes to foster this. So for me, that's one of the things public policy needs to modernize. The second one is we need to focus we need to focus our work on intangible assets. So we need to make sure that innovation can diffuse across the EU, that innovation becomes important in terms of investment, but this is not, the only intangible assets. There is R&D, there is skills, there is economic competencies which are playing an equally important role. And if I come to skills, for example, I was having a discussion yesterday with a few CEO leaders in Hamburg that were telling me that the kind of skills that they are looking for is actually silo-breaking, non-hierarchical, cross-discipline, where there is a mix of incentives, for the workers to become attached to the longer-term going concern of the organization, and also to get the necessary rewards out of this. There is an issue as well, which is, of course, that we need to fill in existing gaps. And we have seen, from what Artur was saying before, that sometimes we were not equipped in the EU, to deliver on, to support from the public policy side certain types of innovation. Let's call it, for example, breakthrough innovations. Now we are equipped. We have set up the European Innovation Council through Horizon 2020, which will be exactly delivering on that. There will be a mix of, in Horizon Europe, there will be an instrument which will have a mix of blended, of equity and grants in a kind of blended finance style, depending on your needs. So it will be much more oriented towards the kind of stuff that you are doing, and where before you found a gap in the market. So I think we need to adjust public policy in that respect as well. So let me just conclude by saying that, coming back to my story, many people have started to see that this new kind of approach, this new kind of agenda is the one that can take us far to accelerate change, to be able to deliver on the sustainability system transitions in many areas, call it health, call it mobility, call it climate change. And I think if we look at what the European leaders were discussing just a month ago in Sibiu, this is pretty much related to all of this, is how to ensure that there are no segments of the population that are left behind in this new digitally driven, innovation-driven, complex and diversified world, and to be able to use, let's say, tools such as the European Semester of Economic Policy Coordination, but as I was saying as well, this policy mix where we have trade, we have competition, we have IPRs, we have industrial policy, education, all converging to really lifting the bar, on innovation in Europe. So it's full of challenges, but I think it's also full of opportunities. And I think that the panel this morning has given us a lot of food for thought as to how to address these complex issues. So.
Roman, thank you so much. That was an excellent set of policy takeaways. No one could have done it better. I would like to give a big thank you to our speakers, Chiara, Pia, Jo, Roman and Artur. Thank you so much. We now have a well-deserved coffee break for about 20 minutes, and we'll come back to discuss business dynamism, and then after lunch, digitalization in a panel chaired by Anne Medler. And finally, we will look at what all that means for EU policy with particular focus on the European semester and productivity boards. Thank you so much.